Economist here. So we're going to be talking about inflation versus a recession and what that means for the economy and how it is that you are positioned and what that means for that position. Now, I want to read a little bit from this speech, and many of you heard me talk about it, but I think it's very important to understand how it is that the Federal Reserve is considering inflation and what that means for monetary policy because it has this to say, and I always got a kick out of this because it really is very telling about how it is that the Federal Reserve looks at inflation. It says the downward shift in inflation expectation has a second round effect on real interest rates, the economy, and inflation. When policy is constrained by the effective lower bound, the downward shift in inflation expectation raises the real interest rates and further diminishing the degree of monetary stimulus, making the downturn worse and reducing inflation even more. Now, when I think about making the downturn worse, for anybody to hear that term in the economy, making the downturn worse, what does that mean, right? For most people, when they think about that, it's like they're losing their job or the chaos and the financial markets like freezing up or something of this nature, like that's the downturn in the economy, or you know the idea of a diminishing within the expectations that the Federal Reserve would think is a good thing. And if you listen to it, it's a downward shift in inflation, an inflation expectation. This is the problem that they face. I'm going to read it again. It says the downward shift in inflation expectation raises the real interest rates, further diminishing the degree of monetary stimulus. So now, if we think about this in a fashion that says, okay, now what does it mean for the average everyday person? Well, when we think about what it is that the Federal Reserve would typically do for the average everyday individual, when we start to lose our jobs, when we start to have pain and suffering, and we're wondering how it is that we're going to pay our bills and, you know, buy the groceries and all that, most people then look to the Fed and say, okay, what is it you're going to do about this situation? Now, the Federal Reserve has a different strategy than what most people think that they do, because they hear this thing called the dual mandate, right? Where they're going to have full employment and low and stable inflation. Now, this is kind of a relative term, like what's full employment, like what does this mean, what is the definition behind it, because most of us can look out there and see that there's plenty of people who are not working, and those numbers are obviously not accurate to the reality of the situation. However, it is the numbers that they are looking at, and those numbers say that unemployment is still quite low. Now, when we think about it again, when the Federal Reserve is looking at inflation, the inflation expectations that they are trying to anchor at 2% is well locked in. Like, I don't know how many people out there think about the Federal Reserve attempting to get to anything other than 2%, right? So 2% is this long-term goal that they are very well locked in on. So now, when it comes to the Federal Reserve and their dual mandate, they're very close to it. Like, not that far from where it would be that they would say, hey, this is it. We are in our, achieved our dual mandate. Inflation is still persistently high and unemployment is a concern, but it's not necessarily a problem. Now, what is it that we're seeing within the economy? Because the Federal Reserve is also looking at something called consumption and aggregate demand. And now, this consumption and aggregate demand is really where it is that the economy is functioning, because the financial market is really not going to have any participation in it if somebody is not consuming. Right. So that aggregate consumption, that's really where the Federal Reserve is trying to activate the economy. Typically, okay, now I know this is confusing, but stick with me, guys. Typically, when the Federal Reserve would try to activate that consumption, it was pretty easy for them to do. They would lower interest rates, and then people would go out there and borrow that money, and that borrowing of money would then essentially be the consumption that the Federal Reserve would be looking for. It was a little deeper than that. Right? It was a little deeper than that. When the Federal Reserve would lower interest rates, corporations would borrow that money as well, and that borrowing of money would lead to the hiring, and hiring people is what got the consumption after people started working more and getting more wages and higher wages, and the unemployment fell. This is where the consumption was found. And so when the Federal Reserve was attempting to stimulate aggregate demand, they would do that by focusing in on the working class individual. And this is so important to understand, because when that working class individual was up and active and participating and having a good time, the consumption would then begin to increase. And that's the aggregate demand and everything that the Federal Reserve was looking for. There's a major problem with the scenario we now have, is that the wedge of inequality has been driven so deep that the ability for the working class individual, in order to acquire a position in which that they can add to the consumption, is literally disappearing by the day. Now, we have to think about how it is that this is happening, because now we got like two segments of the economy. You hear this K-shaped economy. It's really two-tiered economy. That's really what it is. It's not a K-shaped. A K-shape is almost as saying, like, I know it's like two different classes of people going one direction and the other, but really it's better to look at it as almost in two segments, right? You got the working class people who are trying to spend like their hourly wages or trade their time for dollars in order to make their way. And then you got another segment of people who are in asset allocation, who are using those. Oh, hey, thank you, Mama.
Okay.
There, let me just hold it down.
There you go.
Love you.
Love you.
Thank you. All right. So, and then you got people who are in asset allocation, and you're watching that increase by the day. So here it is. You got like the S&P 500. I was just looking at it again, hit another record high. And and you have to think, like, everybody who is like heavily in positioned inside of that is doing quite well. And that is including like real estate, well, maybe not all real estate, but a good portion of real estate. People have a large like position inside of it that's doing quite well with a lot of equity. You got the stock market that is doing incredibly well. You have all kinds of assets that are just like, just screaming their all-time highs. And the people who are positioned in that are essentially the ones who are now the consumer. So when we think about it from the other direction, okay, so that's one tier. Then you got the other tier in the working class. Well, every single day we're finding where the inflationary pressures are getting worse, right? The gas prices are moving up, the rents are impossible to pay. This is the problem of the working class, because essentially their wages don't keep up with that inflation in time. Right? So as it's an annoyance to some people out there, and don't get me wrong, not like all asset holders mean that they're just like, just absolutely like killing it out there. But when you ask those people who are working class individuals, are you struggling? And they say, well, yeah, man, like, I mean, my paycheck barely makes it anymore. It's harder as hell, as far as being able to, try and even position myself in a way that I can even acquire assets. And then you ask them, well, do you have any assets? Yeah. How are they doing? Oh, quite well. Right. And so you can find, even within the individuals that you work with, some of them throughout their life have positioned themselves in assets of stocks or bonds or real estate or something of this nature, and others haven't. Right. And now this is something that I have experienced. I was one of the people who hadn't. I was 40 years old with really essentially nothing. I had a box of silver that I was managed to hold on to, and it wasn't much even to begin with. And that was a position that I was sitting in, $20,000 in debt, and, no real hope or anything else going on. This is a position that I found like many people that I knew were in. Like, it wasn't that uncommon. I mean, it was just like, it was what most of us were doing. And so when I think about it in that fashion, it was just like the majority of the people out there are really in a position in which that the idea of them trying to even acquire what it is that they need to position themselves in assets have not only become difficult on their own accord, right, because of the things that they have done, but then now we got this incredibly stressful inflationary pressure that's now hitting us at the exact same time. So when I think about that, okay, so if you have inflationary pressures that are creating like pain and problems for the working class that would typically create like recessionary pressures, like they would end up losing their job and then stop spending. But now the inflationary pressures actually benefit the asset holders who continue their consumption. You see what the problem is here? Like a lot of times when I think of like how it is that the average everyday person can position themselves in order to deal with the situation that we now face with ever increasing rent prices and inflationary pressures with gas and energy and all the other stuff that goes with it, I think to myself, well, there's only one thing that can happen. It's going to get worse. And understanding why that's getting worse is to understand the asset allocation is really where the consumer is. And to understand that the economy has a consumer aggregate demand that is needed, and that consumer aggregate demand doesn't come from the working class, it comes from the asset holders. And so this is really how we have to look at it. When you have inflation versus recession, and I think to myself, man, you can have a recession within the working class. Don't I mean think about it. Whether you lost your job or not, does it really matter if you can't make your payments at the end of the month? Right? Like, it was just like, well, you working. It was just like, yeah, but it doesn't pay enough to make it to the end of the month. So it doesn't matter whether or not I'm working. It's like as if I lost my job anyway, right? But you didn't lose your job. You're not marked as unemployed. You're still marked as employed, but yet, you might as well have the same issues as being unemployed. So here it is. We have this recessionless recession still running through the economy. Most people are not going to see it in this fashion because, again, we look at it from even through the mainstream media. It's like the the way it's given attention is in a way that like, hey, this is like the old school mentality that still operates this way. If people lose their jobs, there's going to be a recession. And I'm thinking, why would that be the case anymore? It doesn't work like that. That's the way it used to work. How it works now is much better to understand that if you have record S&P 500, that most likely you're going to find the consumer still consuming because the consumer has the S&P, right? That's where they're at. This is how people have now lost the ability to understand why it is that they aren't doing anything. Like they aren't there to do anything for you. And so they ain't stepping up to go and do anything that makes it better for you because there's nothing there for you anymore within this. This is how sad it's really gotten to, and I don't like necessarily describing this to people in this way, but once you get it and see it, it makes a lot more sense that you have two tiers. You have people who work every day, right? They struggle all the time, and then they wonder what it is that they can do in order to make things better for themselves. And then you have people who are in assets. And again, this is an entire different economy. It's one that operates almost independently of everything else when you think about how it is that they have, like, essentially operate without them, right? And that's what's crazy about it. It's not that you can't operate without them, because this is really where it comes down to is that you need somebody to flip the burgers, right, and serve the beers. And that's really where, like, whole robots are coming in, and then all those jobs will go away too. And so, is this economy even leading to something that where those people aren't even allowed to exist? Like, if you don't have the ability to be an asset allocation, then you just simply don't have the ability to exist within the economy. Is that what it's leading to? Like, because eventually, within the idea of robots flipping the burgers and serving the beers, then who is it that's really doing the work at all to be like essentially the lubrication within the economy? And that's kind of what I describe the working class as right now, because they don't really participate in any of the real mechanics or functioning of it. But without them, the things would start to seize up, right? Because they don't have somebody to drive the truck. They don't have anybody to flip the burgers. But once the robots are doing it, once it's all autonomous, then literally the working class doesn't have a position within the economy. They literally just don't, they're just not relevant anymore. And this is the saddest case of the future, and why it is that it's so important that you recognize what it means to be in assets. Because if you're in the asset allocation, if you're in the position of property ownership, if you're in the position of dividend paying stocks or a business that can actually function in that environment, then you're going to be in one of the positions in which that you can actually exist within the economy, because there is no like, hey, at least go down and get a job pumping gas or doing something like that. That, like, yeah, like as if that exists anymore. That, I'm in Oregon, that just ended just recently. We, just to give you a little brief, I'm into it a little bit. Oregon was illegal to pump your own gas up until just recently. So that's why I use that, like pumping gas, because there was so many gas attendants all over Oregon. Okay. Anyway, but you could get a job doing just about anything. And when you think about how that is coming to an end, then where is it that the second tier, like you got the top tier, that the asset holders, the, consumers and all that other stuff. But once it gets to this point in which that the working class doesn't even have a job to go to, this is what we're leading to. How is it that the people are ever going to be able to participate? They're not. They're not going to even be a part of the economy. And this is really where I think how people like Elon Musk is talking about like just handing out UBI and the robots will just be providing everything. Well, how do you position yourself to be provided for by a robot? Like you got to have something that says, okay, the robot will give you something. Right? Like, how do you, is this like people just think that magically you can just like sit on the street and just like, hey, robot, get me a beer? I mean, maybe I don't think it's going to work like that. I think you're actually going to have to be in a position in which that you have something. You own these companies, you own the stocks, you own the asset or something, you own the property, and with that, now you get the benefit of the robot. But if you're just a guy on the street trying to get, to do nothing, then what is it that you get from that? I'm imagining that probably nothing, because you haven't positioned yourself in an asset in which that the robot can provide for. Does that kind of make sense? I don't know, man. I mean, to me, that's the way I kind of see things. People will say, well, you don't have to do anything. And I'm like, I don't think that's going to be the case. You're going to have to do something. And even if it's just being an asset holder, that's something, right? I don't know how many people will see it that way. They'll look at it and just think, oh, no, he said that UBI is what you're going to get, and then you'll have all this wonderfulness provided for you. And I'm thinking, you're not going to exist in the economy. You will be eliminated. If you are not an asset holder of some sort, some way, then you're probably not going to be relevant to the economy. And that's pretty obvious now when you think about it from a working class position. You're almost irrelevant as it is. The only function that we really have, again, is to be the lubrication within the mechanisms of the economy. And it's scary to think about for like the youth. Because again, man, this isn't going to change. This is like you can see the progression of it taking place, and already the talk of it, it's all over. I mean, between UBIs and robots and autonomous and all the other things that are happening, it's just like, okay, well, if this is the case, I can only assume that the underlying economic forces will play out. And anytime you ever have an economy that has taken place, there's going to be a position of people who are an asset, and then people who are working to try and provide for themselves or wherever or whatever. And those people, when they lose that position, they go into poverty and they suffer and they die. And now, if you just think, okay, well, we can just feed them and provide for them and do all this other stuff for them, and think that there's some sort of way that this is going to like just build this massive population of people who don't do anything, I highly doubt that. I really doubt that. The only person who's going to get provided for is the people who hold the asset, right? All right, inflation versus recession. I really spun off into the wild thinking there in the end. Okay, what would a world liquidity problem have for the Fed? Is that the place where they want to be higher for longer around the world? Will that lead to Will that lead to stable coins and the rest of the plan? Well, I mean, I think that would be the essential problem of the Federal Reserve is the liquidity crisis, especially a global one, trying to figure out how it is that they provide the world with the demand for that liquidity, which is, essentially the Fed's major, like, global issue along going on with their domestic issue. It was funny because I saw in the comment section that I think it was Felix the Cat had mentioned that he had talked, or I don't know about talked, but commented with Brent Johnson about uh, the demand for dollars outside of the world in the United States needing to fulfill that demand. And I guess Brent Johnson had mentioned, and don't get me, don't quote me on any of this stuff because I may be wrong. Um, but if I remember right, it was something in the comments saying Brent said that who says that we need to fill this demand? And now I'm thinking, well, Triffin's dilemma, right? And that's what, one of the other comments had popped up had said. And so I'm thinking, well, yeah, like it's not a matter of like we have to do it. Like, it was just like, hey, Fed, we need to fire up the printing press because there's a lot of demand for dollars out there and they're asking for it and we got to fill it and you got to go ahead and just, print up these things. And meanwhile, what we're going to do is run trade deficits to make sure that those dollars get out there to the rest of the world. And we're going to do this all on purpose, to make sure that there's plenty of dollars out there. And this sounds like this really kind of messed up conspiratorial scheme that's all behind it. And now I'm not trying to suggest any of that. What I'm suggesting is that if the demand for dollars outside of the United States starts strengthening the dollar, then you're going to have some big issues with that. One of those issues is your exports. We do export stuff. We have a lot of stuff. The United States exports an insane amount of stuff. We export a lot of things. The problem is that we import way more than we export. And if that dollar strengthens, those exports, the ones that we do get out of this country, are going to start to diminish. And so it doesn't mean like who says we have to. Like you don't have to do anything. Just sit there and watch it happen. I don't care, right? But you're going to see these underlying economic forces playing out. So if the demand for dollars start to increase outside of the United States, you can pretty much equate that to the United States losing its ability to export its items because the people won't have the dollars to do it, right? And so now this is where Triffin's dilemma kicks in, right? So now how do you get the dollars out to the rest of the world? You can do trade swaps and or currency swaps and all kinds of stuff, but by far the easiest way to do it, trade deficits, right? You buy more than you export. So if you import more than you export, you buy this stuff and you export dollars, and these dollars get out there to the world, and now the world has the dollars that they're demanding in order to fulfill their dollar denominated debts. And so to me, although it's complicated, it seems very simple. Like to me, that is one of the simplest things to understand once you kind of get like if I was to have a debt myself, like I just think about it personally. I think about almost all economic forces. All you can relate it almost down to a personal level. The only difference is like you can't really like look at your debt and government debt in the same way, but you can see how the underlying economic forces would play out. And so, even if I was to have a personal debt outside of the United States, like me, Simon, and somebody else, we live in totally different country, don't have anything to do with the United States, and we wrote a debt. I wrote a contract. I owe you $100. That is a contract for 100 US dollars that exists outside of the United States that has nothing to do with the United States. Here's the problem that contract gets used like dollars. So now there's dollars that are being created outside of the United States. And people say, well, these dollars can be created into any abundance needed. So now you have all the dollars you want outside of the United States by people like creating these contracts. Okay. You, you see, like me, I just created one, right? And now this is a dollar. Here's the problem that I see with this whole scenario is that that contract is going to eventually come due. And can you fulfill that contract with another IOU outside of the Federal Reserve note that it's contracted to pay in? Right? So here it is. People are like, well, you can just create as many dollars as you want by making these contracts, but that doesn't mean that those contracts are going to be any good if the dollars don't exist to pay them off. So the dollar itself acts again, like I keep using the word liquidity, the lubrication within the system. Right. And so you need those dollars to exist outside there in order to make those contracts function as if they were dollars, because somebody's going to say, hey man, I want to be paid. And if if there's no dollars that exist out there, then that contract's not going to work for a dollar. Does that make sense? Did I say all that? Man, sometimes I wonder, because like on these live streams, it's like, man, I don't know if I should go back and listen to that and see if I actually got those words out correctly, because I know they're coming out in my head, like I hear them right, but I don't know if I'm saying them right. Awesome. I wish Trump loved Jesus Christ. Um, what about weakening the dollar? Does that work slowly? How do you weaken the dollar? How do you weaken the dollar? That's like, I mean, you can print up all the money in the world, right? Quantitative easing, one, two, three, and four, right? Printed up all this money, took the Fed's balance sheet, 850 billion to over $4.5 trillion, failed to produce an inflationary scenario. How do you weaken the dollar? It's difficult. The dollar is in a constant here. This is funny. This is what's so crazy about it is like a lot of people just think, oh man, the dollar's is easily going to fail. It's just like it doesn't easily fail. In fact, it's difficult to make it fail, right? The reason is because there's nothing else out there, and so the confidence is difficult to lose because there's like I was like, you know what, screw the dollar. All right, shoot, I'm hungry. Give me some dollars. I need to go buy something, right? Because there's nothing else to use. And that's what happens with the dollar. Now, when you go and you look at like this speech that John Williams had given, he actually talks about, hold on, let me bring it up. It's really good. This is what it says. Oops. In that little bit that I was reading, it goes on to say this: even in times when policy is not constrained, Uh, even when policy is not, the expectations of below target inflation in the future affects current decisions, putting additional downward pressure on inflation. In other words, right, monetary policy is always swimming upstream, fighting a current of too low inflation expectation that interferes with achieving the target inflation rate. The Federal Reserve loves inflation. They don't want no inflation. They don't want disinflation. Like, I mean, maybe some portions of disinflation, but they don't want deflation. Right? And so if they can maintain elevated inflation and inflation expectation, they have a monetary policy that they can work with. And so to them, like it's probably more difficult to weaken the dollar than it is to just sit on their hands and let the dollar strengthen all on its own. So how is it that you weaken the dollar? How is it that you create an issue in which that the monetary policy has this ability to not be fighting upstream of a current that's too low of inflation and inflation expectations? Isn't that crazy to think about? That here it is. This speech was given like 7 years ago. And how many people would have been thinking right now that the problem that they were facing and looking for was an inflation that was running too low rather than too high, and to have persistently high inflation would solve their problem? How many people would have considered that? Nobody. Like, this is like probably one of the most like mind-blowing things for people who would hear it the first time. And in fact, it's probably so deep into the understanding of it that they probably just wouldn't even get it to begin with. And I'm not trying to say that they're stupid. It's just like, not by any means. I don't think any of that. It's just that the mainstream and most like discussions of it don't dive into this. I can't do surface level anymore. If it ain't deep dive, then I can't do it. I just like I mean I try to. I try to make it as like, simple and fun and entertaining, or I don't know, even fear mongering at times, but the reality of the situation says something so much differently. And you know. All right. 71 people watching. You guys enjoying this? The cognitive dissonance is real. It really is. And that's something that I started to learn because I'm trying to figure out exactly what it is that's going on with the channel to try and bring like that attention back to it. Not that I want a bunch of attention to the channel, but it would be nice to, at least kick the algorithms in again and get it up to, some decent views to get this information out there. And as I go to start to look to see what it is that the channel was doing that was so popular at the time, and how it is that I've evolved into this, into this discussion that we are in now, comparatively to what we were in before. Something that I realized over time is that when you give somebody the simplest answer, generally they're going to believe it, no matter what it is, right? And when it came to like lumber, I had already, like nobody else could come up with an answer. They had all these complicated ideas on what it was that was going on, except for like greed and manipulation, which a lot of people fell into. But I could explain it so easy, so simply. Right. And when I told the story, everybody understood it. And so when I told the story of lumber, it made the most sense because it was essentially the most accurate one. And it was one that was being told as it was occurring. So for me, it was a very easy story to tell. When it came to the Federal Reserve and the monetary policy, the exact same thing happened. Literally the exact same thing. As I'm reading and studying the monetary policy, going through these speeches and realizing the issues that they were facing from all the way back at Ben Bernanke's day and the deflation and how to prevent it from occurring here. And then I see the issues start to manifest within the ideas of what it was that they needed to solve their situation. And that was the elevated inflation. And I'm like, whoa, holy crap, nobody's getting this. Okay, let me explain. This is really complicated. And as I tried to break it down, people are like, dude, don't you understand money printer go burr, prices go up? And I'm like, oh crap. And they fell into the simplest answer because it made the most sense. And I'm like, okay, well, what about quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4? And they're like, money printer go burr. What else do you need to know? Shoot the money up in the air, watch it all, like, just like devalue and all the other stuff. And I'm like, crap, man, the Fed's getting there what they want. That upward stream, fighting an upward stream of too low of inflation, not fighting it anymore, man. They're swimming in the current, right? They're like, woo, I think we did too much, or, kind of. Yeah. And that's the unfortunate situation we now face with this is that it's so hard for a lot of people to look at it this way. Um, it's like I don't know what to do. Like I mean, it's just like, well, it's unfortunate because this is the monetary policy, and as Warsh goes in and changes the way they view inflation, this is gonna be good, man. I cannot wait to hear what it is that they do. Right? Because this is crazy to think. Like here it is, he's gonna step in. They're gonna change the way they communicate and the way they view inflation. Whoa. Yeah, talk about like, yeah, that's profound changes, and I love it because they're all going to blame it on Trump. All right, and that's going to be my favorite part because it's just like, think about the credible threat theory and think about what it is that they are about ready to deploy here. We know, we know here on the Uneducated Economist, there is no downward adjustment with the Fed funds rate in order to stimulate the economy. That is not a functional tool. That is the problem that they had faced from 100 speeches that I have read. And knowing that's still being the case today because of the low R star environment. That little bit of information right there that I just delivered in the last 10 seconds here of this video is probably one of the key components to understanding what it is that's about ready to happen with the Federal Reserve and their communication and their view of inflation. Knowing for a fact that there is no way for them to stimulate the economy with the downward adjustment of interest rates unless they went negative, right? They are not going to use that for a tool to try and stimulate the economy. They're going to talk about it. That part will happen. And although they're not going to use forward guidance, people's expectations will be elevated and there will be a deployment of information to manipulate that expectation. Whether it's done officially or not, it will happen. And so when people are going to go into the future with this understanding that the Federal Reserve does not have the ability to adjust interest rates to stimulate the economy, we are the only ones who know this. Everybody else out there will not be aware of that. They will still believe that the Federal Reserve has that capability. And now I'm going to give you one bit, right? That is true, that if the Federal Reserve was to lower interest rates to zero right now with elevated inflation expectation, it may have some stimulating effect on the economy from that interest rate adjustment. But that is crazy talk. That wouldn't happen, right? Not even the Federal Reserve would suggest such a thing. So, considering that to be the only case that could ever possibly happen with the lowering of interest rates to stimulate the economy, which is very, very, very unlikely, there is no ability to adjust interest rates from the Fed funds rate. To stimulate the economy from the Fed funds rate. So, as we go into the future monetary policy of the Federal Reserve and they wipe out the communications of it, and we know that there's going to be propagandized information about that, there's no choice but to be there, right? It will create a vacuum that will need to be filled, and it will be filled with misinformation, misguided information, propagandized information. But the fact is it won't be the Federal Reserve delivering the information. And that is going to be so good. I cannot wait. Cannot wait to see it. All right. And then on the other side of that, the inflation and the way they view it. This is going to be interesting because they already changed the way they view it from all the way, from the time that they were viewing it back in the 80s. It doesn't look anything like it did back then. So here it is. They're going to change again, yet again, right? The way that they view inflation and what that could mean. So, like, for me, we have like this whole new way of what it is that the Federal Reserve is going to say, hey, we are looking at the economy like this now, right? And so when that changes, that inflation view and how they view it and what it is that we can expect from that view, then we're going to start to understand how it is that they can deal with their monetary policy. And again, we're going to be the one few people who are going to be looking at it saying that adjustment of interest rates is not what they're going to use. There's going to be something else, most likely some sort of deployment of information, although they say they're not going to do it. I think differently of that. And then the whole balance sheet adjustment stuff, right? So they're going to do some banking restrictions or expansions. And in this idea, the ability for the money to become more available to the mainstream out there, I think was kind of the idea behind the balance sheet adjustments or expansions, and using that as the main policy tool. The only problem that I push back against this is that when you think about like the policy restrictions the balance sheet restrictions where they actually like reduce the balance sheet, that can happen in an elevated interest rate environment. That's when you would typically find it, right? So if you were going to reduce the balance sheet on the Fed funds, Fed's balance sheet, being in an elevated interest rate environment would not be unlikely. But if you want to expand the Fed's balance sheet, if you want to push those things up, most likely, considering the past, if you're going to do that in any kind of significant fashion, it's going to be quantitative easing happening at the lower bound of zero. Now, I don't suspect it. I don't see it. I don't think that's going to take place. But the credible threat of that taking place or being a real possibility can be a profound impact on the economy if that information is deployed properly. Considering that they say that they're not going to be doing that forward guidance going into the future, to me, it just elevates the idea of what it is that the credible threat theory has to offer. Because when they say we're not going to talk about it anymore, about what it is that's going on with our monetary policy, or, with the dot plot and all the speeches or all the press conferences and all that other stuff, we're going to end that stuff. People are going to try and figure out what it is, right? Because if they're not being told, that's going to be like leaving an empty void of what the hell is going on then, right? What's the information? And that's really where the deployment of like propaganda can really be pushed. Like, to me, that's like really elevating the propaganda machine, right? It's like powering it up. It's like, hey, let's fire this thing up and give it some fuel, right? And let's fire this thing and make it go. Because what else is it that people are going to have to talk about? Like if they don't have an official statement, then it's just going to be nothing but rumors. I mean, I'm so looking forward to it. It's going to be like so much fun. I mean, I don't get me wrong. It's not fun. It's not fun for anybody. But for me, watching this monetary policy take place and knowing what I know about the credible threat theory that I've developed over these years with the help of the Uneducated Economist crew, right? The fuzzy dice crew here. Let's give them a spin. We were able to decipher a lot of what it is that was communicated through these speeches and now have an understanding of it, unlike most people will. And I think it's great. Like, I mean, the rest of the people out there, they can settle for the short answers, right? Usually the shortest, simplest answer that makes the most sense, they will take for the truth. And that's it. That's all there is to it. That's why, money printer go burr prices go up made so much sense to people because it was just sort of simplest answer. But for me, when I look at a speech from 2018 talking about how it is that their monetary policy was failing to produce an inflation, even after they had quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4, I'm thinking, okay, there's definitely two different thoughts going on here. And I dove deep into this monetary policy with the help of the Uneducated Economist crew, and this is what we ended up finding. And it's quite unique, in my opinion, anyway. Calling nine. Top of this call is nine. Night of calls nine. How much is too much inflation for the Fed? I don't know what that means. They want elevated inflation expectations, long-term expectations locked in at 2% with a short-term inflation expectation that is elevated. How much is too much? When the long-term expectation starts to rise, that's when it's too much. When the long-term inflation expectation becomes unanchored from 2%, that's when it's too much. But so long as that stays anchored, you're good. All right. What does Whole Nighter say? Yeah, Billy, the AI videos are repulsive to me. Deplorable. Yeah, and that's one of the things. Like, I generated some AI videos, but I'm on TikTok for fun just because of, and I mean, I thought the information within them were pretty good. But anyway, something that I'm finding and that I'm going to really push for is that go ahead and bring on the robots. You know what the robots will never be able to do is do exactly what I'm doing right now. I'm a real person sitting in an old truck delivering what I think is real thoughts from my own understanding of what's going on, and there's no AI generation that's happening because of it. Now, whether or not I'm sitting in this truck or I'm calling bingo numbers or I'm up on stage or it's somebody else who's playing the guitar, when you have somebody who's doing it for real right in front of you, doing it live, that's something that AI will never, ever, ever, ever be able to do. They can mimic it, they can make it look really good, and they can have like all kinds of performances that even have the mistakes and everything else put into it so it seems real, but it will never be real. You will never be able to connect with AI like you can with a real person. And when that happens, when the whole idea of AI takes over, it's that live performance, that being able to do it for real, that's going to be very valued, right? Not because anybody could edit, anybody could generate, anybody could just, change the face, anybody could do all that with just a few clicks of a button on a computer now. It doesn't make any sense that that would be considered valuable. It might be funny for a moment, but once you get it, you feel turned off by the idea. It was like, oh, it was AI, right? Even my even my boy, we're sitting at the movie theater and a commercial comes up and he even said it, oh, it's AI generated commercial. And I thought, yeah, there goes the actor's job, right? This is where Hollywood was talking about. It was just like if you have a low quality act, and it's not a low quality acting job, don't get me wrong. Every acting job is a quality acting job, in my opinion. But when you have something like, trying to sell a product, and you can just have this AI generated image do essentially the same thing that an actor can do, unless that actor was famous and you like that particular person, then it doesn't really matter who it is it doesn't matter if it's AI. This is really where the problem starts to come in for a lot of the actors out there, or the entertainers out there, who this is no longer a position that they can hold to go out there and fill in where it was that an acting position was needed. Now, what is it? Live performance, man. That's it. If you can do it live, if you can do it in front on stage, that's really where the value is going to be found. And in my opinion, it is like, because like, why else? Like, you could just sit here and it's like, you don't need somebody to create anything for you. You can just sit there and type it in and say, hey, create me a cartoon about, whatever you want it to be, and then, make it super funny or whatever. And that's like, it loses value over time. If you could just do it and it's always accessible and it's never like, not there. Maybe that's what's wrong with my channel. I'm just always out here. Uneducated, you are killing me. All right, little 12-foot aluminum with an 8-foot horsepower motor on a galvanized trailer for $50. Whoa, are you selling that to me? Is that what's going on? All right, I can see Hollywood losing a lot here. Oh yeah, they're definitely going to. I mean, you already see it starting to take place, and again, it's all industries that are going to be facing the same consequences, because essentially the working class doesn't have a position inside of this. That again, like, if you don't bring some sort of, like, I don't know, if you don't bring some sort of position that you are holding, or have some sort of very, like, some big value to the asset holders themselves, like, then you're not, it's just not going to fit. You're That's not going to fit into it anymore. And it's funny, it's like people will say, well, that's greed and manipulation doing it, and I'm thinking, is it that, or is it evolution? It's kind of like just taking place. You can see it happening. How do you stop it? It was just like, I can see the program that is designed for me to use to make it efficient at work, right? I work sales for a living. I do retail sales in a lumberyard, right? And I can see the programs that we are using now are so simple to use, and I'm like, why? Like, the customer could essentially fill in the blanks. The customer's telling me, and then I type it into a computer, right? So, like, I'm just basically a middleman here. But even yet, AI could probably read the prints, or even just take a picture of the list of materials and fill in the blanks. And probably do it even more accurately than I would. So when I think about, like, what it is that I even do for a living, I can see where AI is taking over my job at sales, and it's, just bypassing me, and then eventually I just won't even be needed anymore. So there will be some positions in which people are needed. Don't get me wrong, there is those, but for the most part, the idea of having like a working class job, working paycheck to paycheck, is going to be probably one of the most difficult tasks going into the future ever. Right? It's just going to get harder and harder and harder. And that's where, like, if you can, and it's difficult as time goes on to position yourself into a way that you are going to be in assets, because that's the only thing about it. That's the tier that's doing well. So if this tier is doing well and this tier is not, and this tier is probably going to deteriorate into the abyss, into the point that they just don't even exist anymore because there is no need for them. What is it that's going to be doing well? Right? But how hard are we going to fall into sand? I would hate doing sales. I have horrible people skills. Oh, Larry, it's no big deal. It's just acting, right? It's like, it was funny. We were joking around today, like, being an actor, and I love the idea behind it, because I told, like, I was talking to one of the guys at work, and I said to him, I got the greatest answer for when a boss says, do you have any special skills? And I tell him, yeah, I can act. He says, well, what does acting do for you here? And I would say, you know how people come in and they have a bad day and they bring that bad day to everybody, and then that's like, just drags the whole workplace down. I said, if I come in and I'm having a bad day, I'm going to act like I have a good day, right? Because I can act. No, that's really what it comes down to. Sales is it's just being in a position in which that that you are there to make that other person feel important. And in a lot of ways, it's almost like as if you are, you know, I can see where like a lot of times in sales, people like who are typical people pleasing behaviors would fall right into the ability to do sales very well because everything is for like the sales, everything is for it. And a lot of times when people end up having those sort of like ideas when it comes to sales is like you just have to like completely like, to satisfy this customer. I have a tendency to find that those practices end up like deteriorating the sale as opposed to actually bringing it up, right? Like for me, I'm not really there to try and get the money, right? Like the money part of things is so funny. People like have asked, like the money is like the last thing on the sale that I'm even worried about. Like, I mean, I don't even like it's like if I could make the money part of it like last 15 seconds in the sale, that would be great. The rest of it is all about making sure that they get the right product, that they're like heading in like everything is everything else. Right? And that to me isn't like hard. That to me is fun. Like I enjoy helping customers, helping them find the right products, figuring out what the project is going to be, what the best options are for it. To me, that's a lot of fun. I know a lot about building materials and I like sharing knowledge, and that's kind of like what I'm doing when I'm doing a sale is I'm giving them the knowledge that they need to make the appropriate decision on what it is that they're going to do. Once they make that decision, boom, it's over. All right? It's just like so to me, the sale part of it is really easy. It doesn't have anything to do with money. Isn't that weird? But that's the truth of it. And then when I see other people who are conducting themselves in a way where they kind of put the money in an importance, it really ends up being blocked. It blocks in so many ways. It's weird to think, and I've learned that more and more, especially over the last few years, being observant to it is that's really where I think a lot of times people end up putting up a limitation in a wall is that they think of that money first, right? And then instead of thinking like, no, we got to be helpful, useful, and get the right product first, right? That's the important part. Everything else is easy, you know. Uh, Smile a lot every day, stupid. That's sales, yeah. And that's really what it comes down to. But then again, sales are one of the easiest ways to make a lot of money. Like there's a couple of ways you can make some decent money in this world. You can become a professional, you can be a decent investor, or you can do a good sales, right? And so being in sales is pretty cool. I mean, not to brag it up, but when you're a good salesman and like you sell a lot of stuff, you kind of get to do whatever you want, you know? I mean, you don't get told what to do. You kind of just, almost have the cocky attitude because anytime I've ever been to a place that had a high dog salesman or whatever, they have always been accused of being a cocky individual or something. It's just kind of goes with the territory. And so when you think about like doing good at sales, it really is like, a position of pride within it. It's just like, no, man, I'm really good at what I do here because one thing that I am really focused in on is making sure that the customer is getting what they want, right? Like that's what makes it good. But yeah, it is tough at times, and it is kind of like, a show that you have to put on, and at times when it gets really frustrating, you're still like, okay, well, got to turn it up just a little bit more and, not get frustrated with it or whatever. I agree. I was always focused on clients. Yeah. Why does sales feel dirty? I don't know. Well, I think commission sales have a tendency to be a little bit more on the I don't want to use the term sleazy side, but that's kind of what I think about when it comes to like commission sales of like, say like the used cars kind of thing or something of this nature. And there's nothing like, sleazy about it, but that's really where I think a lot of times people will get that feeling. It's because their commission is based on that higher sale, right? So if they can get the higher sale, they get more money from it. When like the position that I hold, I don't like whether or not, I sell $100,000 in a month or $10,000 in a month. It doesn't change my paycheck any. There is, different things for as far as like compensation that happen in other ways, but it's not on a paycheck on the amount of sales. So there's no competition for commission. There is a desire to get a good margin, right? And so there is that position, and we are like, ever trying to get the best margin we can, but we're also in a position to be competitive. And so, like, there's only a couple of other people out there. And when you start losing your sales because you're just marking it up too high, you know what you're doing wrong, right? Because it's easy to try and push the margin too far and lose the sale just right away. For me, I I know my competitive margins. Like I don't even have to look at anybody else's bids or anything else from any other locations. I've been doing this long enough that I know exactly what margin I'm going to put on whatever products that it is out there. And if somebody else out there can beat me on it, I'm going to tell the customer that's a good price. That's a really good price, and I think you should go get it. Right? Because if I'm going to sell it for any less than that, I don't think I'd be making a whole lot of money. I don't know if it's worth the time and the effort and the energy. So if that person out there is that desperate to get that sale at that low of a margin, they can have it. All right? They can work for it because that's like by the time you operate and move that stuff around, get it delivered, and all the other stuff. If you can make any money off of that, good luck, right? Because there is times that it just isn't worth it anymore, and that's when you tell the customer, hey, that is a great price. They're offering you a really good deal. And I've done that before, and I don't like doing it, but at some point you're just like, this is it. I'm not going to go any further. I always try. Always try. Hey, is there anything that we can do to try and make this a little? Can you pick the material up? I might be able to cut a couple of margins off of it if I don't have to deliver it. I might be able to do something there. I always try to figure out what it is that I could do to try and make the sale happen. But, you know, I mean, it's just, it's unfortunate. Sales is one of the most difficult things to do when it comes to like figuring out how much it is that you need to mark something up. All right. Lumber has like no markup to it. People come in, well, what if I buy $5,000 worth of lumber? I'm like, it's going to cost you 5 grand, because there ain't nothing I can do. Let's talk about the nails and screws and glue and everything else that goes with it, because there I have a position in which that I can move on. So if you want to buy all the hardware from me, now we can talk about something. But just buying the lumber package, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to try and move because it's just the margins on it are just so low. Right? when you uh, when you start getting into other products out there, there's a lot of things that you can do to try and find like the cheapest product. For example, if you can find stocking dealers of a particular item, such as decking, right? So if there's a particular decking that you want, like a composite decking, and you think, oh man, I want the best deal on this decking. Well, if you could find a stocking dealer of that particular decking, so you call around to the different lumber yards, and this is becoming less of an opportunity, especially when you get the big box stores who are pretty much taken over. But if you call around to the different distributors of decking and you find who it is that's a stocking dealer of that particular decking, they're going to probably have the best deal on that color. Like if you can go to anybody and they can get it for you and they're not a stocking dealer, then you might end up paying a higher price and they're not going to be able to put as a competitive margin on it. And that's going to be unfortunate for that particular sale, is that it's probably not going to go through very well. If you know, if you go and like just expect all prices to be the same across the board, you're really taking your chances, right? And for example, this actually happened not too long ago. a package of screws got special ordered, and I put my standard markup on it. And because the customer had purchased, quite a bit from us before, I actually took it down a little bit, right? And it was just like, okay, so this is what I would feel would be a fair price for this with the deck package and everything else. And I didn't think anything about it. To me, like I've been doing it a long time. I thought, okay, that's pretty easy. He comes in, he's like, whoa, he's just blown away by the price. And I said, it's a fair markup on there. And he's just like, no, everywhere else, this is how much it would be. And he puts out this number. Right? And so I never do this. Right. And I said, okay, hold on 1 second, sir. And I printed out my confirmation and I set it down in front of him. And I said, this is how much I paid for these screws. All right. This is exactly the number that I am going to end up paying for these screws. It's less, or what you are saying is less than this number that I'm paying right now. Now, granted, you may have found somebody, found some as overstock, found a sale on it, found somebody who made a mistake, whatever. You might have paid for them cheaper in the past. You might show me somewhere else. This is what I paid for it. And then I asked him, what is it like? You don't have to buy the screws, right? I said, that's fine. I'll take the screws back. Totally cool. You don't have to take them, right? But he wants them. He wants to take them with him. And I'm like, I cannot give you these screws for the price that you're asking for. This is how much I paid for it. How much do you want to pay for them? Right? Because I need to make some money off of it, and I have to explain how much it is that I'm marking these screws up. So now exactly how much is it that you want to pay for this, considering what it is that I was asking for it? Right? And so now this is the situation in which that I was going into is like, I have no idea. I don't even want to make the sale anymore. I want to keep the screws. Right? I want to take them and send them back, whatever, that I have to do, and not do the sale because I don't want to make it, I don't want to lose my margin on it. Right? And so I gave it to the customer. It was just like, well, what is it that you think I should charge you? Right? And so finally he came up with a number. And I said, is that number going to satisfy you? You want these screws for that? You'll give me that much money for these screws. And he said, yeah. And I said, okay, I'm going to do it. I said, this isn't my typical. I wouldn't have done it for this, but because, you are so adamant with all the other stuff and so insistent upon it, I'm going to give you that opportunity to do this. Right? So when that situation came up, I thought to myself, I really should never have given him that opportunity. I should have kept the screws, but I knew he needed that deck package done. I didn't want to hold him up from finishing his project. I really didn't. I wanted to see him finish his project. That was the thing that I was most concerned about. It wasn't him and his money or anything else. It was his project being completed. Because I know that if I was on that crew, if I was being held up, I was just thinking about all the other things, not him and his money. Right? I was thinking about the other stuff. But I'm also thinking about my company and how it is that I'm a salesman and I'm here to make money off of the sale. So now what is it that I need to do here? Because I want to see that project get completed and I want to get this sale done. So what is it that I need to do? All right. And so that's where we came to that compromise on it. I wasn't satisfied with it. He wasn't satisfied with it. I don't think it was a good sale, but the project got done. All right. But the project got done. And so at the end of the day, in my opinion, that was still a win. Even though like the entire thing kind of crumbled and fell apart, the outcome of it was still a success because the project was completed on time, and everything else. And that was, like that's the ultimate goal of the whole thing. It's kind of an interesting story, huh? All right. 30. I could never do sales. I'd be a failure at it. It's practice. Dude, what are you talking about? All right. Um, I leased a vehicle when I needed reliable transportation, and it was peace of mind for me. Yeah. Question: did you read the article that they dropped the charges on Jerome Powell? Is that still going to be a credible threat news? No, I mean, I think actually we kind of covered that with the idea of Warsh and what it is that he's planning on doing. Like, I never I never anticipated like the use of the credible threat in the Jerome Powell thing. I never thought was any kind of real useful threat or any kind of issue really happening there. It was more of a distraction, if anything else. But the use of the idea of credible threats of the Fed's independence, I think, is still quite there, quite prevalent within the narrative. Like War's going to be doing whatever it is Trump tells him to. And so when I think about like the Powell thing coming to an end, it was like finally, I don't even know why we were talking about that stuff at all to begin with. And it didn't really have any kind of real weight to it anyhow. So, for me, like the ending of that discussion and then opening up the ability for Wars to now step in is really like I, I never really thought that it was going to be anything different than that. If they kept pushing it, then it would have been used, right? That whole idea of pushing the Warsh confirmation out further and then holding Powell in position for a longer time. I mean, you think about it, if that was to actually have occurred, how well they could have played that within the mainstream media. It would have been absolutely amazing. But there was no real need to do it, I guess, or, there's the outcome of it was like unsuccessful for that. But it doesn't change the idea of the Fed independence and the questioning of that with Warsh. And so the credible threat of the Fed independence is still there, whether they're using it with the Powell, investigation or not, doesn't really change the idea behind it. It's just I never really like. I mean, did anybody really give that any kind of credible, like, expectation? Oh, hey, right on. I got a super chat. I mean, I know a lot of people were looking at it, but like nobody really like everybody said it was it wasn't real. Like they said it was just like this is like bogus investigation going on here. And so I really I'm just thinking it was just like it just didn't work out very well. All right. Inflation better, wealth effect in asset classes can print money, export inflation, wages will rise to catch up versus the pain of a recession. Wages will rise to catch up versus the pain of a recession. Um, Robert, thank you so much for the 4.99, man. I really appreciate it. I don't know if the wages are really going to catch up. I mean, I know that in the past that would have been the case. Oh, right here. I know in the past it would have been the case that you would have seen like after the recession that wages rising, and then those wages would have essentially moved into the consumption and increasing the aggregate demand. But I don't think the economy is really in a position that is really going to be the case any longer. We can really witness that after, like, really towards the end of the great financial crisis, like really from the Obama administration, the end of the Obama administration, all the way up to COVID. We had experienced incredibly low unemployment, like historically low unemployment, but it didn't create the inflationary scenario that the Fed was looking for. So even if wages increase, I don't think it's really necessarily going to help. Like the benefits of Social Security and wages and fixing all that other stuff, those things are going to deteriorate over time. Like you're just not going to be able to keep up with them. And even if they were to raise, they wouldn't raise fast enough in order to be like in a consumption position. So like they're no longer the consumer anymore, and the focus will be on those asset holders. Hey, thank you so much, Todd, for the $2. You guys are awesome. Thank you for all the support. I really appreciate it. Out here for an hour and nine, you guys are always sticking to it with the uneducated economist. Universal income. Yeah, I mean, universal income, I would assume, is going to be a necessity at some point as they attempt to produce a consumer within the working class itself, because we're not going to, you know, I mean, we're just not going to be able to keep up otherwise. And so they're going to do, like, they will try and attempt to do it. But unless the people themselves take that money, that UBI, and position themselves into asset allocation with it, like literally don't spend it on luxury, but spend it on like investments, then they'll find themselves, it'll still deteriorate into this. All right. Tabitha says, Todd is the man. Todd says, love you. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Simon, you are the only person. Oh gosh, here we go. Deplorable. I hear talking about the Fed independence anymore. That was not a credible threat. That was amplified. You are the only person I hear talking about the Fed independence anymore. That was not a credible threat. That was amplified. But I think it does. Like, even the idea is like Warsh is Trump's pick, right? And that the Fed is going to lose its independence because Warsh is coming into that position, into a chair position. Like that to me, right there, is just like questioning the Fed's independence. And even the idea of investigating Jerome Powell and firing the jerk and all that other stuff, that was questioning the Fed's independence. It's been nothing but one constant credible threat about the Fed's independence. Um, I cannot possibly be the only one talking about it. If everybody else, like, I'm the only one who's talking about it being used as a monetary policy tool, deployed in a way that is very credible and very real, but not likely of an outcome. And so, therefore, right, is used as a monetary policy tool, very much like tariffs, right? The emergency tariffs that were never legal to begin with, and the Supreme Court knew it, and the media knew it, and Trump knew it, and I knew it, and you knew it, and everybody else knew it, but nobody cared, right? And now they're like, oh, can you believe it? He's giving all the money back to the corporations, and it was just like, well, how do you bail out the corporations if you're in a recessionless recession? All right? There's only a few ways you can really do it. You think about it, like during COVID, they used those special purpose vehicles, said that they were going to be bailing out the corporations by buying corporate debt, made the announcement, funded the special purpose vehicles, said here's the entities to do it, and then the market went out there and front run the Federal Reserve, and all the corporations were able to find all the funding they needed before the facilities were up and running. Right? The credible threat alone was enough to do it. And so these are things that they use regularly, whether they mean to or not. Right? Like, the idea behind it is just enough. So here you have the tariffs, you implement the tariffs, they say the tariffs are illegal. Everybody talks about them being illegal. The Supreme Court says, yeah, they're most likely illegal, but guess what? We're just going to go ahead and let them roll for a while. Why? Why would you do that? Right? Oh, we got to make sure that they're illegal. Well, there's a problem that comes from that, and that is that people are getting tariffed, whether they're illegal or not, and that money is going to go somewhere. Where does it go? Right back to the corporations after they elevate the prices with inflationary expectations from the tariff. And it was just like, how could this be any easier to bail out the corporations than to use an illegal tariff? Supreme Court delay the decision on it and then give it all back to them after they, charge the consumer with elevated inflation prices. To me, it worked out so well. I mean, I did a video back at the end of December of 2025 that said that exact thing, talking about this, like that being the scenario and how it is that they're going to bail out these corporations or essentially give a bailout without actually having to bail it out. Like, because that's the worst part of a recession is bailing out the corporations and everybody losing their job. But if people don't really lose their job and the unemployment doesn't rise that far and the bailouts are secret, I mean, like, they're not secret bailouts, but they're kind of, I don't know, what do you call them? Like, underhanded, like, I don't know, sneaky, sneaky bailouts? I don't know. I am still recovering from last night's safety meeting. food and energy shortages are potentially headwinds that could compound this tough economic atmosphere for the working class. Oh, Marco Polo, it's gonna be like that. The working class is going to suffer from this point on. There is no recovery for them. All right. Like the times that, you could go and like follow in your dad's footsteps and do the career choice that he had and, just kind of live that life out there like that. It's not a real, I mean, for some people somewhere it might be. And there's probably people who can like, jump into the family business that's very successful and do well. But for the most part, people are going to find that it is going to be very difficult to operate in a working class position that was similar to the prior generations had done. It's like that is going to get more difficult as time goes on. And as people are like kind of almost patiently waiting for the ability for that to change and that there will be a better time ahead, it's it's better to understand that the Cantillon effect is not really going to allow it to go down that road, and that this is like this is the direction it's headed. It's going to be very painful for a lot of people to experience this because again, like they just don't understand why it's happening, and it's really sucks for a lot of people to think like it's being done to them. That's the way that I think I used to feel a lot, that it's being done to me. And taxes are being done to me, whatever, the interest rates are being done to me. Things were being done to me. And that's the way I felt about a lot of stuff. And when are they going to stop doing this? When are they going to stop doing, when it's going to stop being done to me? And when I looked at that and I said, is it really being done to me? Or am I in a position in which that I feels like it's being done? Like if I didn't hold this position, would I feel this way? If I was sitting in a different way, if I was like not necessarily worried about a particular bill coming in, like what kind of position would I have to be holding in order for that to not feel, for me to not feel that bill being stressful? And I know like back in the day when I had vehicle payments, like those vehicle payments were so stressful. And the day that the vehicle payment was gone, it was just like, oh, what a relief. What a relief. And it felt like the whole world was off my shoulders because now I could finally drive in ease and I didn't have to pay for it. And I had this vehicle and all that. Like I just felt like this incredible relief. And I was able to like make those bill payments in a so much easier fashion that I could ever do before. And I think to myself, man, that really is it, is people's understanding of their standard of living. And that living in a lesser standard of living, like I would love to drive a new truck. I mean, I look out there and I see all over Astoria, everybody drives these really nice new vehicles all over the place, and they're really awesome. And I think to myself, man, I would love to have a new truck, right? And then I think about what it would feel like to make the last payment on a new truck. That last payment on that new truck is exactly the way it would be to be driving this 97 Suburban right now. That truck wouldn't mean as much. When you drive it, is like I've driven new vehicles, I'm thinking, man, this is awesome. This is so cool. And like nice sound system, it's really comfortable, all these gadgets, it's really amazing. And then after a little while, it doesn't really mean that much. It's just another vehicle like anything else. And although it's nice and it's cool, you don't really think about it that much, right? But the feeling that you have not having debt and having the ability to drive around and not really care that much about your vehicle, like you might care about it, you care that it runs, you care, somewhat what it looks like, but you really don't have that much like attachment to like this major prized possession or something like that. So the feeling of making the very last payment on that truck is exactly the same as driving this 97 Suburban right now. It's debt free and it's transportation. That's it. And now with that, you have the ability to make those bill payments. So that's not a stressful thing. And this is really how I think a lot of times people, especially across America, have justified themselves into their standard of living and say, well, I at least deserve this level of standard of living. But then now all this stuff is being done to me. The taxes are being done to me. The interest rates are being done to me. All these things are being done to me. And I'm thinking, are they really being done to you? Or is that just the environment that you're in? Because if you didn't have a new car, then you wouldn't care about the interest rates being done to you. Right? It's only because you have the payment that you think the interest rate is being done. Otherwise, you wouldn't care. Right? What are we talking about? I forgot. Something about inflation and recessions. All right, moving on. Oil changes and tires so expensive on big vehicles. They really are. Paid off my truck in 1997. New trucks are going to have to monitor you soon for safety. Yeah, I kind of agree with that. It's probably going to be the case. This new economy. What are they going to do with the 90%? I hope they don't get rid of us. Will they make us useful? No, that's what I'm trying to explain here is that you're really just going to become irrelevant within this economy, right? Like you can already see it happening with the rise of homeless. Right? I didn't want to really bring it up, but I figured people would just kind of gravitate towards it and just understand it in that fashion. You can see it already happening. Like there is no position for them. I mean, there's no place to go. The home isn't available, the job isn't available, the capability isn't available. It's just there's nowhere to go. And so this is going to get worse going into the future. As we start to see it happening, you're going to find the birth rates are going to start to diminish dramatically. Like the more that we move into this luxurious experience and wish that you need assets more than anything, the last thing that people are going to do is go and have a kid, right? So they're going to acquire assets by any, because it's like life or death situation. Like, what do you want to be on the streets, or do you want to actually have something? Do you want the robots to take care of you? Well, you better have something for them to have a reason to take care of you, and that's going to be an asset allocation. And the only way to do it is to position yourself now, because by the time we get there, it will have been too late. And that's what like you don't need to like think sci-fi or like crazy propaganda, like, conspiratorial or anything like that. You don't have to like even really look that hard. You can just, just go out there and look and witness it taking place within the rise of the homelessness, right? The failure within the middle class and the exponential rise of the top 10, 20%. Like that is really where the economy is going to be, is up there. Everything else is going to deteriorate and eventually fall away. And I mean, it will always be there. You're not gonna. It won't be like disappear. It won't disappear. They will always be there because there will be people who fall from grace. They'll eventually, misappropriate, get into drugs, do whatever it is that they, do wrong, and they will end up in that bad situation. But the idea of like that being an that is going to be like less of an opportunity for people to even get to. All right. You just won't even be room for it. So how can you possibly be here? Where are you gonna go? All right. Deplorable. I clean my own yard. I do all my own repairs in my house myself. I pity the fool who do not know how to change the swamp cooler pads. So are you saying we can't have a market crash when they need continued elevated inflation to keep the top 10, 20% consuming? Okay, so what I guess I'm saying, how late are we into this? An hour 24. I guess what I'm going to say about the market crash is that typically when you would think about a market crash, say, prior to the great financial crisis, everything after the great financial crisis changed. And there was a major market crash that had taken place there, but that was something that was somewhat predicted by the Federal Reserve, by Ben Bernanke. And although a lot of people say that the Fed was caught by surprise there, they weren't. They had plenty of speeches and talking about what happens when they hit that lower bound of zero and what it was that they were going to do to fire up asset price or fire up asset purchases and stuff like that. So prior to the great financial crisis, when people started to lose their jobs, they stopped consuming and then the markets would crash. Like, I'm trying to think of it the simplest way. So that's like the simplest way to understand why markets would crash back in the day when people lost their jobs, is because they stopped consuming. Now, if you lose your job, it doesn't really matter. You're not the one who's consuming, right? The consumers at the top 10, 20% who are still going even through all this turmoil that we are now facing, they're actually increasing their consumption. Right? Their assets are now hitting record highs. To think like we are in a position in which that the market would crash because we have lost our jobs is like kind of like that would have been a case, say, prior to 2008. And anything prior to that, that would have been true. After that, that's not the case anymore. So whether we work or don't work doesn't really make any difference. We're not relevant to the economy. We're not part of the mechanisms that churn the cogs and the wheels and all that other stuff. We're, and I know for a lack of better terms, we're essentially the lubrication within the system. We're the things that actually make it actually the grease in the machine. Without us, everything would seize up. We are driving the truck. We are flipping the burgers. We are serving the beers. But that could be done by robots. So the cog and the machines and all that other stuff, unless you are an asset holder, you're not part of that, right? And now the lubrication will be robots, not the working class. And if you look at it in this fashion, it makes a lot of sense because you're less needed. The lubrication part of this machine is less needed like it used to be. It used to be that was all that was needed. It was like everything flew through, like in fact, you were the cogs of the machine, right? The working class were. But then eventually the cogs of the machine, the working class, was now the not the consumer. The cogs of the machine were the asset holders. Does that kind of like, I don't know if that's a good analogy to use, but to me that makes a lot of sense. Like how it is that this economy is functioning is really comes down to who it is that is producing and saving. If you're not producing and saving, then it's going to come down to who it is that is consuming. And if you are not consuming, then you're not relevant. Because producing and saving in a debtor consumer economy is a very difficult task. All right. Hey, you need to go towards where the money is. I think he is farther away from Wi-Fi router. Is my Wi-Fi on? Hold on. No, my Wi-Fi's off. I think I just got back connected. Okay. Kirk, I'm started reading Bible. I'm done with gospel, going through the Pentateuch. I don't even know what those are. Pentagod. All right. Oh, I'm not reading your MSTX. Okay. I'm headed to Costco after this for $5.47 gallon gasoline. My goodness. Yeah, that's incredible, Nida. We got, I mean, what was it, $4 and I think it was 4.90 or something like that at the pumps at the on the way into town. But yeah, I got $5. Bitcoin is the new money. Most of you just have not woken up yet. Well, that's not true. I think a lot of people have woken up to it, and really, like Bitcoin is never really going to be a currency that is used in commerce, just simply because it would destroy economies almost immediately. But it will be. I mean, the genie's out of the bag at this point, so it's just like it's not going away, and it will be used in a lot of functions within the economy, but as far as like daily commerce use, I just don't see that being the case. No fixed currency can ever serve that role. Not in this global economy the way we have it. It just wouldn't function right. Uh, bring back horses? Huh, that would be fun. All right, shouldn't be much. Oops. All right, shouldn't be much of a line at this hour, and this time matches my name. All right, the self reinvestment that does happen under inflation is short horizons such as maintenance and energy efficiency. None of this is expanding productivity, raising investment that lifts product productive R star. No, this is raising expanding productivity, raising investment that lifts productivity R star. Well, I think the only way to really lift R star, if I got it right, I don't know, maybe thank you, David, for the comment. I mean, the only way to really lift R star is to understand like what it is that was driving the R star down. Even in this speech, he kind of addresses that the three main global trends that appear for the account for the bulk of the decline in the neutral rate over the past quarter century. One is demographics. Populations are aging as people live longer and birth rates have fallen. That problem hasn't changed. The second is productivity growth, which has slowed around the world, and I think maybe that's what you're addressing here. And that really, I just don't see that has increased in any kind of dramatic fashion either. And then the third is the heightened demand for safe and liquid assets, which has led to a wider wedge between safe yields on government securities and central bank reserves and the yields on riskier assets such as corporate bonds. And although the yields on those central bank securities, or not central banks, but the government securities have risen, I think the corporate debt has also risen, and that wedge is still quite wide. So all these reasonings that have dropped R star to as low as they are, I don't think much of that has changed, even though there might be some kind of change to like, the population, like older people dying during COVID. But really, I think like the idea behind that is probably very limited in any kind of stretch. And the birth rates have continued to fall. So we know that there's a population decline that's happening. So that hasn't really changed. The productivity growth, again, time will tell on it. But again, like I don't think that's really increased much over the last few years, and nor do I see that happening anytime in the near future, considering what it is that we have going on. And then that demand for safe and liquid assets, or the wider wedge that has been driven between the safe and liquid assets like U.S. Treasury and corporate bonds. I don't know where it is that would change in the near future. Like none of these things seem likely to change in any kind of dramatic way that would lift R star off that lower bound. You know? And that's why one of the reasons why I just don't believe that the Federal Reserve has any real position to stimulate the economy with the lowering of interest rates, and that's the whole reason why is that. Hey, who do we have here? B though J. I don't even know. BTHO. I don't know. Botho. I love some of the handles. I can never figure out what it is that they're trying to say. But thank you so much for joining the channel. You're gonna find the member only videos are awesome. There's a bunch of speeches that we have broken down so that you can get a better understanding of monetary policy. And we're gonna start breaking down some more here very soon. There's not a lot that's been talked about as far as monetary policy, and that's generally what I try to keep the channel focused in on when we're talking about the Fed. Um, but when war steps in, there's going to be some information delivered with that, and we are going to be on it. I am so looking forward to it. Like I really am, because I know that he has some changes in mind to the communication style, and that's essentially the thing that I have been so focused in on this entire time. And here's like another little kind of tidbit for all those people who said that the Fed was reacting. If they were reacting to the information, if they were being forced, like their Fed is being forced into particular directions, then how could they possibly end forward guidance? Right? Like that would contradict forward guidance. And so there's no possible way that they were reacting while admitting that they were using forward guidance the entire time. Those two would be like opposite of each other. So all right, what do we have here? Um Todd is NSA. Okay, I actually want to live in a van down by the river at this point. I think they would be awesome. You know, Brian, I would. I saw a guy, he had a Sprinter van earlier today. He slid it open. There was like right away, as soon as you slid it open, you could see like a sink, right? Like right there. And it wasn't a big sink, it was a small one. And I kind of poked my head into the van and I could see he had his bed up there and he had some surfboards and I'm like, oh bro, and I could see like an outlet, like where you could plug a computer in or something. And I'm like, and it was super, super simple. Like there was nothing going on inside of this van. And I'm like, oh, bro, man, this is awesome. And he was like, oh, yeah, it's okay. There's not like a whole lot going on in here. I said, that's why I like it. And he was like, yeah, me too. Because that's all he had was like essentially like a sink and an outlet and a bed. And I don't know. He had some cabinets in there too. So I don't know what was in the cabinets. But anyway, I thought, hell yeah, man. Like, if you could live in your car and work, like, and you had like something nice to live in, like, I mean, something convenient as that. It's like, and you're just a single dude and you don't have anybody else to be responsible for. It's like, hell yeah, man. I would totally do that in a heartbeat, and then save all that money the entire time. People would be like, oh man, don't you want to live in a house? I'm like, hell no, man. I want to live comfortably, cheaply, conveniently, and save a lot of money so that I can position myself in a way that I don't have to be stressed about anything else, man. Living in a van down by the river to accomplish that sounds wonderful. uh, the current forward guidance is future forward guidance, maybe unofficial forward guidance. Yeah, that's about right, Justin. Yeah, that's about right. Kevin Morris has great hair. He does. I was looking, I was pretty envious of it, so I had to go get my own haircut. But I just like, I mean, I just went to my own. I was gonna do the whole JD Vance thing and kind of continue on with it. I think him and I can kind of like pull off the same look. But what am I? Who am I gonna compare? I can't compare to that. I mean, those guys are like they're top level. They're just top level stuff. I'm gonna come out occasionally. My hair is gonna be messed up. Those guys, never, never, ever, man. Always perfect. Yeah. Right. Chris Farley was not as funny as Jim Carrey. Yeah. Bitcoin goes up real fast. I recommend you get on before it just back on the old high. Yeah, I mean, I do agree with Deplorable on that. I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea to dollar cost average into Bitcoin from now on. Like, if you could do $50 a month, $50 a week from now on, just for the rest of your life, and take as much and position yourself in as much Bitcoin as possible on that simple dollar cost averaging basis, I think that that's a really good idea. Now, the only thing that I would have to say is that I don't have much expectations for Bitcoin, so to dump every dime into it seems a bit illogical. But to try and acquire like one Bitcoin in your life as a goal, and just whether you achieve it or not, but just try to constantly get there, I think you would find that to be an extraordinarily great position to be in going into the future, as it doesn't seem like Bitcoin is going to go away and it's only becoming more popular and there's only so much out there. And if you really think about it, like if you have a half a Bitcoin, you have something that is very rare. If like you think about it, there's only ever going to be 42 million people who could ever get a half a Bitcoin. Well, that's a position that I have. When I think about it, it's like only 42 million people could ever possibly do what I have done. And even in that, there's way less than that because of all the Bitcoins that have been lost and held and frozen and whatever. So having any kind of amount of Bitcoin is probably going to put you in a very rare position comparatively to the rest of the world out there when the rest of the world realizes, man, I wish I had a little bit too. So buying into Bitcoin, I think is a great idea. $50 a week or $50 a month, whatever it is you can afford from now on, without any expectations of it. You know, for me, I've taken that route and it's done incredibly well. In fact, there was times in which that the Bitcoin had done so much better than all the rest of my portfolio, and I didn't even really like want it to be that way. It just did it just because of how awesome it was going up. When it falls back to, prices that, when it drops dramatically, I like that. To me, that is that finally good. Now I want to get back in again because it's like when it's at its high, that is a very difficult time to for me to want to dollar cost average into it. I like dollar cost averaging when it's unloved, unappreciated, and unnoticed. Like even for silver now, it's like I don't really feel like being into the silver purchasing game now. If it was under $50, I might consider it, But when it's above it, it's like, hey, I have to wait here for a while until it's unloved, unappreciated again, and then I might start stepping into that game. When I hype things up, man, if Bitcoin goes to $1 million, oh boy, right? That is when I start making mistakes. That's when I really start making mistakes. All right, guys. Wow, we've been out here for a while. What is it, an hour and 41? Tabitha, it is easier than you may think, and if you don't have electricity, then 90% of digital dollars don't work either. Yeah. I love dollar cost averaging to everything. Yeah, me too. It's just like I wasn't like I've tried trading, like tried to time markets and stuff, and I'm just like I found myself to not be a very good market timer with like day trading kind of things. So I just found it better to just be into a particular trend over time. And I found that to work out really well for me, like way better than anything else. And it's so much easier, and I don't have to think about it. And it's like, okay, that's awesome. There's people out there who really know how to make money day trading, like actually make a living doing that. And it's a lot of work, man. They're on that screen constantly, hovering over it, trying to figure out where the moves are, looking at the charts, doing figuring out the moving averages and stuff like that. And I'm like, whoa, that like that's a lot of work. And then you have to pay bills with that, right? God, that sounds terrible, right? That sounds, I mean, for other people that may sound great. That sounds like a wonderful experience. I don't know if that's how I want to pay my bills. Like I'd much rather do sales to pay my bills, than to try and do day trading. If I could day trade and like keep that money, then that might be a different story, right? Then that might be like something that I might do in order to acquire more assets in my life. But to try and day trade for a job to pay my bills, I'm thinking, man, that would drive me nuts. I don't know if I can necessarily want to do it that way. But not the problem with day trading, it's the reasoning behind it that I would like, suffer with. All right. Day trading leads to more suicides than any other vice. Boy, I can imagine why. Yep, dollar cost average into my portfolio on 9/10 of every month. Set it and forget it. Yeah, penny stocks. Um, yeah, I'm not really into penny stocks, but I could see where people might want to take a bit of a gamble in them and see how well they can do because you can get quite a bit of change and volatility out of it if you can get in and out of it quickly. That's the problem with penny stocks is that although you might find some good price moves, the liquidity of them is not necessarily as easy, meaning like, getting in and out of that market at that price. All right. R star is an abstraction like faith. It is seen by its works. You can say it. The federal funds rate succeeds in stabilizing prices. The federal funds rate must have been brought in line with R star, but if it doesn't, it must not have been. Well, I think there's a couple of different ways to look at R star, right? So you have R star, which is the predictive estimate of where the economy would be operating at its full potential alongside low inflation and full employment. So the Fed funds rate operating at R star would be very low in that like Goldilocks moment, like low inflation, low and full employment. And that's not what we're experiencing now. So the Fed funds rate, in order to be neutral, has to have that elevated inflation expectation, or in order to be neutral with that inflation expectation needs to be elevated, right? So this is what pulls the Fed funds rate up in order to find that neutral position. But if the inflationary expectation was to fall back down to that low environment, whatever, like, I mean, they don't give a good description of this, and they don't even describe inflation like how it is they even look at inflation. So to say what R star is like you're saying, it's an abstract, but it doesn't take away from the fact that R star is trying to figure out where that neutral position would be if the economy was operating at its potential alongside low inflation and stable and or low and stable inflation and full employment. And although that's not a real thing that you can observe and nobody's going to be able to tell you exactly where that is, it doesn't mean that it's not there. All right. And that's really where I think, like, because we can't observe it and we don't know how to, like, use it for monetary policy because there is no way of observing it. And it has this abstract kind of idea on how it is that it even, whether it is even there. But the fact is that if you remove the idea of the estimates of it, there is a low interest rate environment in which that the economy is operating at its potential. And that's something that they have, like, they're sure of. If you pile the inflation on top of it, the neutral interest rate will be higher on account of the inflation. So between these two, this is really where I feel that the inflation expectations, the scenarios will continuously be there, one way or the other, whether it's a new one that's manufactured or one that comes up. But this to me is the ultimate way of dealing with the fact that they are operating with this low R star environment, whether they can see it or not. And what I find funny about it is just like to just remove it from the conversation altogether doesn't take away the idea that it still exists. Right? You know, I mean, whether you want to discuss it for monetary policy or not and say, hey, we're not going to incorporate this into our discussion any longer, that's fine, but it's just like saying, hey, we're not going to worry. I don't know how to put it. It's like, I don't know. I don't even know how to come up with an analogy for this. It's like saying, like, you're not going to worry about it raining, even though you know it'll make you sick or something. Like, I don't know how to quite come up with an analogy for this, but I'll figure one out that's really good. But again, like, you can't just ignore this. This is not something that is just not gonna not be there. It is there, and you gotta focus in and think about like how it is that the Fed could possibly stimulate the economy if they cannot get far enough below that neutral rate, even if they stop discussing it. Yeah. Interesting how every advanced economy has declined and a low R star, and developing economies have a stable R star. Um, Demographics play the biggest role in the downward and upward pressure on the neutral rate. I really agree with that. I think it's really the population and the older demographics that are probably the major contributor to the second issues that come up with like productivity growth, and then that heightened demand for safe and liquid assets. Again, if you have an older population who is not necessarily eager into taking risk, they're most likely going to be buying into those treasuries, those United States government bonds, which would then start driving the yields down. So this is really where that wider wedge had been driven in, is because again the demographics of the people who are buying into those treasuries. Like if you're an older retiree, you're not going to want to take risk. You're going to want to take like security, and that's really where that wedge was driven. So I agree. I think it has a lot to do with population or demographics and the less population growth. I lost a lot of money day trading. I'm hoping that I'm going to start making money now. Well, I guess practice makes perfect there. Deplorable. All right. No, I don't day trade anymore. I swing trade. I got tired of losing. Uh, yeah, it's okay with you. I use my 401k monies to make money. I think R star is a tug of war between supply and savings and demand and investment. When R star declines, that rope is being pulled harder by savers, and then R star rises, it's pulled by investment and demand. Well, I don't know if we can, I mean, maybe, but like the R star moves very slowly over time, right? And it doesn't like, even if we look at it, it's like fallen dramatically to a level that doesn't really move much after, like, I mean, it might, this is like the estimates don't even hardly move at all. Let me bring it up here real quick. Oops, come on up. Because last time I was looking at the chart, I was just thinking, damn, this thing hardly moves at all. And like I mean, it does move like on the chart when you, oh, of course, it's not gonna every time, man. As soon as I go to look something up, it just the computer freezes. I think it has something to do with being out here, away from the Wi-Fi, and with having the phone working at the same time. I don't know what's going on, but like it works, and then it like, and until I have like a video going, and then I go to try and use the internet, and it just stops working. Alright, my main problem is I never used more than 25,000, so I only had 3 sales a week. Okay. Um, why do they care if Japan sales or not? I'm not sure what that is. Uh, I listen for him for his philosophy hour. He talks about God for about an hour a day. If YouTube doesn't turn you against the algorithm, day trading sure will. Right on. All right. It's been in decline in the Western world due to the rise in older demographics and their desire to save their dollars. China will soon fall to negative rates due to the same road Japan took, high savers. Yeah. But I mean, at this point, like China's still at least in a productive capacity, right? I mean, although they lose a lot of their manufacturing to other nations out there, they're still a manufacturing state. But yeah, I think they'll fall victim to it as well, just the same as all the rest of them do. All right, are we getting to the end here, guys? I'm addicted. I got to stay away from it. Oh, you talking about the day trading? Well, I don't know, guys. Like, to me, I find this stuff to be the most interesting out there when I think about monetary policy and what it is that's going to be coming to the economy. When you think about like the division of inequality, like the divide is just so extreme now, and then like everybody is just constantly talking about it, and almost as if they're waiting for something to change and like there be a better way coming. And to me, like, I'm looking at it and I think to myself, well, the reasonings that it's happening is probably not going to change. And in fact, they're probably going to get worse going into the future. And so, really, you have to think, like, what is it that was happening before to what it is that's happening now? And when the working class was the consumer, things looked a hell of a lot different than when the asset holders became. Because once that started taking place, everything within the working class started to disintegrate, started to fall apart. People are now like, almost in a desperate cry to try and figure out how to bring that back. And I'm thinking it's not happening. It's not going to happen. But it doesn't mean that you can't do something about it. It's just you have to understand what it is you need to do because the working class position is going to be difficult to use without cutting back expenses and increasing, that flow of money coming in. You're never going to be able to get into the assets that you need to. It's going to be a struggle just to pay the bills, and as time goes on, it's going to be ultimately the only case that people will have. So if you have the ability to cut back now and increase your cash flow so that you can position yourself into those assets, whatever it happens to be, and whether it's rental properties or stocks or bonds or business or education or whatever it is that you need, everybody's going to have to figure that part out for themselves. But once you start doing that and you're able to position yourself in a way that you can do that regularly, then most likely you're going to find yourself on that other side of the wedge. Now, it may not be in a major way, but at least you'll have something comparatively to those who are struggling with a day job, trying to stay up with the Joneses and buying nice cars and making payments and all that stuff. That's going to be a very difficult road to maintain going into the future. And that's unfortunate for the majority of people. That's the way they live. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, do you really feel the young people have no chance? No, I think the young people have no chance of performing the way that it was once done. Going and get a job, work that job, get the career, do all the steps to try and make it. That is going to be very difficult. Now, today, it is easier to not only make money, but then position that money than it has ever been. But not in the traditional sense. The traditional sense is the hardest it's ever been. But all the opportunities of the world are now more present than they have ever possibly been for people to take full advantage of, and they don't. So look, like, you got to think outside of the norm, right? Like, if you were thinking, well, my job doesn't pay enough and I pay too much taxes, so now what? Tell me how I'd work with that. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, you can't work with that. That's not going to work. Can you do something online after work? Right? Even make $1 after work. If you can make $1, you can learn to make two, and then so on. So this is sort of the mindset you need to be in. And I think it's really funny how people say, oh, dude, man, that is just so lame. What could you ever possibly do by investing $5 a day? That doesn't make any sense at all. And I think to myself, that is probably one of the funniest things to ever hear, is that it doesn't make any sense at all. You took $5 a day to invest it, and that doesn't make any sense at all. Yeah, you're never going to invest. I get it, right? Don't go back to work, man, right? Because if that doesn't make any sense at all, then you're never going to do it, right? Because you got to start with something somewhere, sometime, and maybe it could be just buy $5 worth of stocks. Because you buy $5 today and $5 tomorrow and $5 the next day, and you do that for 50 years, and at an 8% interest on a compounding investment, that's $1 million. And it only took $5 a day to do it. And I see it all the time, how people say that isn't, that, like, give us something real to work with. And I'm like, if you're not willing to do $5, then you're not, and you're not, you don't see it. You're not going to happen. It doesn't make any sense to you. Totally true. Right? And that's why it isn't going to happen. Once it makes sense to you, then you would do it, and then you wouldn't be asking the question on why it makes sense. All right. Even 25 years is a half a million. Is it? Even with the compounding interest, is 25 years a half a million? The snowball effect, yeah. All games are in favor of the house. Yeah, that's true. All righty, we're gonna give it one more minute here. Cut it at 2 hours. It's a long enough live stream. Thank you very much for hanging out with us. Be sure and consider joining the school community. The more people we go have over at the school community, the more fun it's going to be. And the weekend webinars, great time, conversation directly, which is so much better than having like the comment section and then me kind of reading through some of the comments. To actually have a conversation one-on-one. That's really what's going on at the webinar. And we had a great time last weekend and the weekend before. So every Saturday, 9 o'clock, we're going to be, hanging out, just drinking coffee and, talking whatever it is we want to talk about. And then also you'll have access to the credible threat theory and the course there, and all the information that I have gathered with all these speeches and them being highlighted so that you can go right to where it is that I found the important sections of those speeches to internalize. All that stuff is available over at the school community. And then the free portion of the channel is basically for everybody to enjoy, but the members only, there's stuff there that really is going to be quite unique, that is not necessarily is something that you're going to get quite here on the regular stuff. When I deep dive into the speeches and I break these things down, it gets into a conversation of understanding these things that is so much different than what it is that you're going to get from just like a brief hearing of it. So again, like, consider becoming a member of the channel just, for the support of the Uneducated Economist, but then also to access those past speeches that we have reviewed, because they're incredibly beneficial to understanding what it is that the Federal Reserve is going to be doing going into the future. Thank you everybody for being here. Uneducated Economist. Thank you for hitting the like button. Thank you so much for those super chats and the support for the Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.